What's up, YouTubers? Kind of got a lazy Saturday going on this weekend, and I thought, why not knock out some viewer requests or viewer submissions for videos? So I'm all fueled up on my coffee. Today's Quick Trip, not an official sponsor. We're going to be welding with 7014. Very uncommon rod as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you can generally get it at your local tractor supply store, your local welding store probably has it, but I don't know, I've never really welded much with it. Back a long time ago when I was in school, they made us weld, I don't know, 10 rods of it just to see what it was like, and that was it. I bought these years ago, I don't know, 3 years ago, never really used any of them. I mean, they even have rust on it from sitting in here so long. But yeah, we're going to be experimenting with that. If you don't know, 7014 is similar in how it runs to 7024, similar flux. However, 7014 can be run out of position, 7024 cannot, or at least you have to be far better than I am. And I don't know, give that a shot sometime, 7024 overhead. I also have these little guys here. You can get 7014s and 1/16 diameter 332. We're just going to stick with, I believe those are 1/8 inch rods. So let's get into it. Thought I would show you. So this is 7014 1/8 inch rod. Here's 7024 1/8 inch rod. And look at the amount of flux that this 7024 has on it in comparison. Crazy. The 7024 rods deposit a huge amount of metal in a single pass. 7014 is probably going to be comparable or similar to more like, I don't know, probably 6013, 7018. Now, before I actually get to welding, and I'll have arc shots and everything in this video, I just want to discuss two main points with 7014. And I don't want to call them myths, or I don't even know what to call it, but I'll just say it. A lot of guys will use 7014 because they feel that, well, it doesn't have the rod storage requirements of 7018, so it's safer to use for your average person. And the truth of the matter is, if you had watched my video dealing with that, and I'll put a link in the description, you'll realize that using 7014 as a substitute for 7018 does not solve any issue whatsoever, because the issue with why 7018 rods exist is to avoid hydrogen embrittlement, basically imparting hydrogen from the rod into your weld. Well, 7018 can be, the water can be baked out the moisture in the rod to produce a low hydrogen weld. 7014 cannot, I mean, realistically, it's not spec'd as a low hydrogen rod. Therefore, if you weld high strength steel or high Rockwell steel with this 7014, it's going to crack just the same as 6013 or 6010 or any of those non-low hydrogen rods. So using this rod as a replacement to 7018 because of storage requirements is not going to actually do you any good in that sense. There are reasons to use this rod over 7018, and I can give you a couple. So if you look here, and it might be a little bit difficult, now I'll just read it to you. So this rod will run on DCEN, DCEP, or AC. So the one benefit to this rod is it really doesn't have any problems running on AC, and you can run it on any polarity, which gives you options, I guess, especially with the little 1/16 7014. Those are really handy for doing real thin material, especially AC, which has less penetration. They'll run really good. So the main benefit I would say to this 7014 is that you can run it on any stick welder, any polarity, and get pretty acceptable results. It also produces a stronger weld than 6010, but I have a feeling that it produces a weld with more ductility than 6010 and probably 6013. So not only is it stronger in tensile strength, it's stronger likely in ductility. So all interesting things. With that said, I think it's time to do a couple beads with this. Now, from what I remember, this runs to me more like 6013 than it does 7024. It's very easy to have the slag run in front of your rod as you're welding, so I find very steep drag angles help, and we'll look at all of that. And I also remember out of position welding with this is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not as easy as 70-18 or 60-10, there's no doubt about that. But with that said, let's get to welding. For the first pass here, and probably for all of these passes, unless the puddle and the weld looks bad, I'm going to be running at about 130 amps. This rod specs between 120 and 145, which is a pretty narrow range. I tend to run on the hotter side of things. I prefer it. That's the ballpark, so 130 is right in the middle. So from my perspective, this is bringing back a little bit of memories for me. The molten puddle, and you'll see that in arc footage coming up, is a little bit harder to see than like a 60-13. It's more liquidy. That is definitely closer to a 70-24, I would say. Very dense slag. It's probably, I would say, even thicker than 60-13. Thicker than 70-18 for sure. So let's take a look at what we got. You can see the ripple pattern in it is kind of pretty muddled, pretty flat, and that has to do with how slow this molten pool solidifies. The slower the molten pool solidifies, the smoother your bead is going to appear, because all of your oscillations and movement in your hands are just going to kind of equal out because a molten pool stays liquid so long it self-levels, if that makes sense. Reasonably straight bead. When I got to the end, I just kind of stopped and then broke out. What I should have done is brought it to the edge and then back. My setting is probably actually a little bit on the high side for this rod. I think it could benefit by dropping it down to 120 amps, but I think for the time being, we'll just keep it where it's at. So let me cool this plate and then I'll start it up again and we'll get some arc footage. I'm gonna fast forward through this footage. It's just too dark. The next set of them that I did is a lot better, so in a little bit I'll show you that. So that arc footage turned out a little bit too dark. I'm going to run another 2 passes, but I thought I would share this. So this, I did drop the amperage to 125. I ran it at 125. Then I ran a second pass right away right after that. And you can see how much flatter it is. It's like wider and flatter, less crowned up. This rod, and it could just be that these are really old and just been sitting around my shop. There seems to be a lot of like this pretty heavy spatter. Like if you look at this stuff isn't just like little, you know, little pin dots. I mean, this stuff is pretty decent size, especially up in there. And I'm welding on completely prep clean plates. So that's kind of surprising to me. Like when you run 70-24, you don't generally get this. So I find that kind of interesting. I haven't ran enough 70-14 to know if that's normal or not, but the weld itself, it kind of runs like 70-24, but to me, it almost looks more like 60-13. It's kind of like a cross between the two. Interesting. Well, what I'll do is I'm going to clean this spatter off a little bit and try and get some more arc footage that's a little bit better. So in this arc footage, it's a lot clearer. If you notice, the puddle lags a little bit further behind than 2 electrode diameters. And that's just a case of 70-14. It looks like 70-24 as well. You can see the puddle isn't very clearly defined. It's just the edge where you no longer see that ripple movement and it gets dark. That's the edge of the puddle. Here is another pass. I'm kind of surprised at the amount of like bigger BB spatter throwing out of the weld pool. I'm almost thinking these rods might just be old and maybe they're contaminated or something, because even the finished weld seems to be rougher than I remember 7014. She's a little extra crispy there, a little bit hot. So let's talk about what we see here. Now you saw the arc footage for these two and these two, and I made comments on it, so I won't try and cover everything again a second time. I just find it interesting. You see how it has like all these, it almost looks like bubbles in the weld. I don't know that I've ever noticed that with any other rod. I think that's just how it solidifies when it comes from molten to solid. This stuff does get slag peel, kind of like 6013 if you look at it. The inside of that is all bubbly too, so I think it just has something to do with the way that the metal solidifies. So pretty interesting. I would say I definitely prefer 7024 to this rod. Just on a flat plate, it produces better looking welds. But obviously, if you got an AC buzz box and you got 7014 laying around, this is probably a more useful rod to use simply because you can run it out of position, like vertical up and overhead, which I'm going to do next and see how it runs. Yeah, you can really see kind of a weird bead appearance. Yeah, it's unlike any other rod that I have generally ran. Now these two seem to have better or less spatter, but you can still see here, and you saw it in the arc footage, there seems to be like a lot of bowling balls being thrown out of this, and I could chalk it up just to the old rods. Hard to say, but I don't know, I think that's just an inherent deal with this rod. All right, well, what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna clean all this mill scale off the back, set it up and run a couple passes vertical up and just take a look at what it looks like. I'm hoping it's a little easier than 6013 to run vertical up, because I find 6013 has a real bad tendency to not deposit enough metal and get a lot of like gouging or undercut welding it uphill, but I won't know. And I sure as hell don't remember what it was like running this uphill, so what better way to find out than actually do it. So here's our setup. We got our plate pretty much vertical. I got it leaned back just, I don't know, a couple degrees just to make filming it a little bit easier. Won't affect running this. Now I have a feeling that this is going to have a much harder time running uphill, because I think the puddle, you saw it in that arc footage, how liquidy it is so far behind where the rod is. And I think that's going to translate into making it much more difficult to weld uphill than rods like even 6013. And that's something to be said, like if you can use a rod that makes it a lot easier to weld uphill, and you probably should use that rod. I mean, this rod, like a lot of them, like even 6013, it's an all position rod, but I really don't find that it welds that good uphill. And 7018 and 6010 are so much easier to weld uphill. But hey, I know a lot of you guys, you got to use what you got, and I'm not knocking anything. You know, I'm just sharing my opinion here. But it pays to get good at whatever rod that you're running. All right, let's see what this thing does. a little bit hot at the top. You can tell by how orange it is. So my initial impression, well, for one, I'm not really positioned too well to be feeding it smooth, so I had a very inconsistent feed. Like I slowed down, sped up, you know, hey, is what it is. What I find interesting is I didn't see that much dripping off the bottom. Like if you've ever ran 70-24 uphill, you know that you're in trouble because about an inch up, it just starts turning to liquid. The other interesting thing is it didn't seem to be undercutting as bad as 60-13. So depending on what this weld looks like underneath, you know, it may actually be a little bit easier to run this uphill, I think, than 60-13, but the proof's in the pudding. So right away, a lot of interesting things here. This is not porosity, or at least it's not subsurface porosity. It has what appears to be bubbles right on the surface. And this almost looks more like flux core wire, self-shielded flux core wire. You get this when your stick out, your contact tip to work distance is wrong. If it's too close, the molten puddle freezes too fast with self-shielded wire, and you end up getting this. I mean, yeah, I guess it could be considered porosity. So one of a couple reasons for this, maybe my travel speed was too slow, could have been too fast, my amperage could have been off. A lot of things could cause this. Now in the vertical up position, I would say that I wasn't running too low of amperage based on how hot it got up here. I would say that my travel speed may have been slightly slow. However, it was, more than anything, inconsistent, I would say. So what I'm going to do now is let this plate cool. I'm going to get set up in a better position and rest my elbow up here over on the table so that I can feed it in. Because I'm sitting down on a chair, it's a little bit difficult. This would be much easier to weld uphill if I was standing where my arms are free and not, you know, in the way of me. But I'll let it cool off. We'll run another bead, and I'm just going to try and change a few things. Anytime you have an issue with a weld, you don't want to go and change absolutely every variable. So you don't want to change your travel speed, your arc gap, your amperage, because then if something gets better or if it gets worse, how do you know what change that you made caused it? You want to do like a variable at a time. So once this is cool, I'm going to keep the amperage the same, 120 amps. I'm going to just focus on running a bit more consistent and a bit tighter of an arc gap than what I had. And we'll see what happens. If it looks different or worse, we'll figure it out. I dropped the amperage from 120 to 115. I know I'm ignoring my own rules of changing one variable, but I think I can get it dialed in better here. The other thing is, I think honestly, my travel speed, I was so worried about the puddle dripping that I probably just was moving too far forward too fast. But we'll just see what happens this go round. Yeah, I cut out on that. Based on what I'm seeing, it's starting to gouge the plate a little bit too much. So I'll let this cool off and we'll see what we got. So the bead appearance, I'm still getting like little divots. It's not really porosity, it's more or less divots. So, and you can see, let me get the rod out of this and I'll show you. It might be a little hard. How much it's chewing away into this plate. I'm going to try and come with more of a straight in rod angle. I had a pretty good push angle going, so I'm going to see if it runs better with a straight in angle. So that's what I'm going to run now. It's weird, it seems like it's actually welding with more amperage even though I dropped the amperage a bit lower. So I'll clean this off and let it cool off and we'll keep going at it. Alright, so the plate's fully cooled off. This weld, at least the second half, seems to have less of the bumpy appearance. and even the first part, it's overall less, still has like some craters in there or something. I'm gonna run another pass here now that it's all cool, and I'm gonna drop it even further to 110. Do everything the same, just even lower amperage, and see what's kind of going on with the molten pool. I don't like how it's like chewing away and undercutting the leading edge. I mean, maybe I need more rod angle than what I'm running. So what I'm gonna try and do is run straight in for the first half. If I don't like that, I'm gonna stop, clean the slag off, and I'm gonna run a pretty stiff push angle and see if it improves. But we'll see what happens. So that's looking better. I'm gonna run a push angle and see if that changes anything. Yeah, the push angle made it worse, there's no doubt. I mean, you can see this flux dripping off of here. That's not metal, it's flux. Or actually, it might be metal. Yeah, that's metal, wow. Yeah, so more push angle bad, less push angle good. Yeah, it's hard to say if that was metal or not. So you can see here, more push angle, not good. It widened it out and it caused it to drip, and then this metal here, molten metal, literally dripped right over, and I broke it off. But so you pretty much seem to want to go straight in. It produces a better weld, and obviously this is unacceptable. You can see over here, there's still some dust on here I didn't wire wheel. This is about the best I've been able to do, is this section here. And you don't see any of that evidence of, it's like gas escaping the weld that you have on a lot of this. So reducing the amperage and going straight in, it seemed to help a little bit, but I'm gonna put this back up to 115 or 120 and run straight in, I think, on a new plate, and we're gonna see what happens. All right, so I bumped the welder up to 115, got a new piece of steel, 1/4 inch. So far, it's kind of a little bit of a bastard to run uphill. It kind of runs the way I suspected, very little wiggle room to get things right. 70-18, far easier to run uphill, 60-10, far easier. This is gonna be more of a challenge. But I like a challenge, right? So I'm just gonna run a bead up on this, and I'll do a few starts and stops, adjust parameters. We'll see if I can't get this dialed in. I'm gonna run more amperage. I'm gonna try 125. We're gonna jump it up quite a bit. Part of the problem might be is I can't seem to cram the rod in there very well without the arc stuttering. So if I up the amperage a little bit, it might actually help with that. At least that's my hope. Oh, a little off course there. So that seemed to help. The arc is no longer, or the rod's no longer sticking. The bead appearance is still pretty rough. Let me clean this off. Yeah, still getting, real bubbly weld. Oh, let me try and restart and run smoother. So on that pass, I did a slight oscillation side to side and slowed down travel speed a little bit. The bead looks a little bit better, but it's still, yeah, I don't know on this one. So again, I oscillated side to side. You can see I'm having a pretty hard time keeping it straight. I can't see the edges of the plate. Pretty rough bead appearance again. All right, I've learned quite a bit now. I'm gonna make an adjustment. I'm gonna drop the amperage back down to 120. All right, we're at 120. I'm gonna run another weld. So you can see looking real rough, and I'll pan the camera down. I tried to do a weave just to see how it would react. Not good. Tried to just restart, plates heat soak, not good. And then ran that weld. However, I know this seems ridiculous. I see some progress here. So this is starting to look better in the sense that I don't see evidence of porosity like I did on the other ones, or just gas bubbles there. It's pretty clean. I think what's going on is the amperage. It's weird, like I'm playing with the amperage and I'm not seeing the difference in a molten puddle that I would expect to. Even, I am assuming this is getting pretty hot as I'm welding it. So let's go and try one more plate, and I think I'll be able to get this dialed in, hopefully. All right, I got set up. Got a piece out of the scrap bin, 1/4 inch thick again. I dropped the amperage to 100, and I'm just gonna see what's gonna happen now. I know that I've been playing kind of like musical numbers and stuff, but I think based on this, I'll be able to make an opinion on what to do next. We'll see. So there's still some slag on this that I didn't clean off. You can see it over here. However, all the porosity is gone. And at 100 amps, yeah, I'm gonna take an educated guess, or I'll give you my opinion on this. So running a flat bead on plate like this is gonna be the hardest thing to do. When you actually weld like an uphill fillet, you have two surfaces for the molten metal to cling to, which makes it easier than running just a bead on flat plate. So I can tell you the molten pool on this rod stays very liquidy. Obviously it can be run uphill, but what I find is that it's so like minuscule of a correct range where everything has to be right. It's very unforgiving. Dropping the amperage down eliminated the like gas bubbles that were stuck in it. However, like I don't know, this is a tricky bastard to run uphill. It's that simple. I mean, really, I'll just cut to the chase. If you run a lot of this uphill, and I don't think there's too many of you out there that do, put a comment down in the comment box of some tricks with this, because I can tell you that, you know, 7018 has a lot of leeway with what you can do and still get it to look pretty good. This rod is basically, if anything's off by 2%, your end result doesn't look good. And I mean, the weld looks very much like the flat position. It leaves a very rough appearance. You know, not a huge fan of that. Well, rather than wasting more time on this, because I don't think too many of you are going to be welding this uphill, nor am I, you can see it's possible. It's very rough. It's very difficult to run uphill. Let's actually do a weld joint that's more consistent with what you'd probably be doing. So this is an easy to do lap weld, which is a good option to use this rod on. You can see that molten puddle is just round, maybe a little bit eye shape. And all I'm doing is dragging it along with the rod touching the plate. And if you travel a correct speed, very consistent, the molten puddle will stay the same size and it will wet up over the top of the plate and into the bottom plate. That's really all there is to it. Just drag it at a slow enough speed to where it stays the same size. You're just moving the puddle along, that's all. Well, to wrap this video up, you can see flat position, it welds okay. Really seems to have a tendency to get if you don't kind of hold it off to the edge and then weld back through, you get like a crater there. Pretty difficult to get clean stops on it, but that could be me too. The weld appearance, very rough. I don't remember 7014 having this rough of a weld appearance, and maybe it's just the old rods that I have is contributing. I'm not really sure on that one. Welding it uphill, it's a definite challenge. Produces a very rough bead profile. I mean, this is, you know, mediocre at best, and you can see it almost looks like it has gas pockets that solidified right on the surface, much like flux core wire. This section of this weld looks pretty clean, but again, same issues there. Fooled around with a ton of settings. I don't have that other plate handy. It's over in this pile over there, but this weld as well, I mean, it's tricky to run this uphill. What I don't like is it has the same tendency as 6013. It's almost like it doesn't deposit very much metal when you're moving, which makes it extremely prone to undercutting the steel. And once the leading edge is undercut like this, and you can see it in there, then all it wants to do is drip down. And I couldn't find a fine balance of just the right amperage, just the right travel speed. You know, if I screwed around with this rod for a good, 2-3 hours, just running more or less kind of like a flat plate like this and doing beads, trying to dial it in, I'm sure I could get a lot better at it. But this isn't a rod I normally run uphill, and I don't run it normally at all. So that's part of the reason why the results are less than what I would have liked. Now in the flat position, you saw me weld this lap weld in on 1/4 inch. Does pretty good. Lays down really flat, and I was running that at about 130 amps. I could have slowed my travel speed down to deposit more metal. This, I would say, deposits maybe 10-15% less than a 7018. Definitely less than a 7024. 7024 deposits a huge amount of metal for a pass. But yeah, there you have it. 7014, it's usable. I didn't run it on AC, but it's just going to have a little less penetration. But for you guys out there that want to produce stronger welds than your 6013, 7014 might be an option for you. Just keep in mind, you're going to have to practice quite a bit to get good at it uphill, vertical up. Because if I'm struggling with it as much as you saw me, then you know it's going to be a challenge if you're not used to or have very minimal experience running vertical up. Yeah, with that said, thanks for sticking around for the video. If you have any comments, questions, or something you would like to see me do, feel free to leave it in the comment section. Till next time, thanks guys.